Joining us to discuss mood and meaning in a time of crisis are Briar Harland, Executive Director of Colmar Brunton in Auckland, psychological therapist Jock Matthews, who specialises in anxiety and grief, and Brian Gould, the former Waikato University Vice-Chancellor and British Labour MP and long-time critic of economic globalism. Welcome to you all. Briar, could we start with you? It's your job to know what people are thinking and feeling. What are you seeing in your research this year?
Well, we're actually seeing some really profound changes in consumer behaviour. And on one hand, you can see why it's being perfectly logical. Prices are going up, petrol costs more. And on the other hand, it's really hard to understand why, because prices have come down and petrol's got cheaper, as have interest rates. And when we look at our data, because we do a mind and mood survey with 1,000 consumers every couple of months, we have over 3/4 of New Zealanders saying that they're deeply concerned about the cost of living these days. Now, that's a lot of people.
And yet your clients are people who want to sell things to the public. What do they do now? What should their approach be now?
Well, that's interesting as well, because in theory the best thing that they can do is build brands in these times. But everyone seems to be pulling into this recession kind of mindset, recession kind of mode. And, I mean, generally people are feeling more and more anxious all the time. And yet when you look at the actual behaviour, the things that people say that they do, 44% of New Zealanders actually say that they're really concerned about not being able to pay for things once the bills are paid. And that's actually only up 7 points in 2 years.
But do they take a rational approach when they have these feelings? Do they actually cut down on the big items, or do they still scrimp on the small things and spend big to make themselves feel better?
I think it depends on what New Zealander we're talking about. We've got this kind of worried well group that actually don't have a lot to worry about at all, given the current situation, that are doing some pretty strange things. They'll talk about buying $15 wine instead of $20 wine. They'll talk about deciding between activities for the children to do after school rather than doing all of the activities, which is completely different to the New Zealander that will talk to us about having to water down their milk by 50% so the kids can drink dairy. You know, that's totally different. And you'd have to say that one is a very rational behaviour, even though it's a terrible thing in a dairying nation like we have, because it's hard when you don't have a lot of money. And the other one, you know, where's the rational behaviour in that? Yeah, it costs a bit more in the supermarket. Maybe you can't save as much, but it's still a pretty good lifestyle.
And yet, Jock, we had another harbinger of doom on Morning Report this week with the report that relationship services is seeing increased demand from couples who are feeling under pressure because of the economy. What do you make of that?
Well, that doesn't surprise me, given that, you know, I think 40% of the issues that relationship counsellors find contribute to stress within a relationship is to do with financial security and arguments around finances. So in an economic time when there are pending kind of changes, I'm not sure whether New Zealand's seen all the changes yet. In fact, Brian will probably talk about the changes that we're possibly likely to see. But people are already worried about those changes, job losses, needing to tighten their belts, looking at changes, and they have a direct impact on couples and how they relate to each other, and also how they parent their children and manage generally.
So independent of their actual financial position, there is this other factor of anxiety about the future. Is that what it is?
I think when change affects people, it causes distress. When unpredictable change affects people, it's even more so. And if that stress is extended over a period of time, it can lead to people going through low mood and feeling chronically distressed, worrying more. And unfortunately, when people worry more, they try and attend and find out more information, and then they attend to media that tends to be kind of the harbinger of doom and gloom.
Should they just turn off the news then?
Well, I've often said, turn off your television, and I'll encourage the people watching this program to turn it off, because we may be talking about things that will cause them distress. But, I mean...
We need jobs too.
Well, I know, I'm sorry about that, but I think you know what I mean. If you're constantly attending and checking and worrying about something that affects a significant percentage of the population anyway, and you have the media telling you that it's getting worse and worse and worse, what happens is people understandably become even more overwhelmed by the potential of that change.
Well, I've felt that to some extent myself. I mean, Brian, I'm interested in these issues, and yet I have found myself tuning out of ceaseless market news, of foreign share markets going up and down, because I've lost track with what it signifies. It strikes me that this kind of reporting isn't actually very useful for people. Do you agree?
Yes, I do agree. I think what it creates is a problem that both Briar and Jock have pointed up, and that is most people have difficulty, I think, in sorting out questions of scope and questions of timeline. In terms of scope, yes, this is a major crisis for the economy as a whole, not just ours, the world economy. Big, big news, very serious. But for most people, there may be a small element of belt-tightening, but nothing much is going to happen. There will be people on the margins, however, who will lose their jobs and will lose their houses or will get into terrible debt that they can't handle. They're the people who are going to cop it. Similarly, over time, there is a very serious crisis that has been brewing for years, if not decades, which is now going to take a long time to unwind. But it's not going to be determined on a day-by-day basis according to whether the Dow Jones goes up or down. Not even in a single day, but in a single hour, in a single 10 minutes. We mustn't get hooked on that. There was a moment, I think, in this crisis when it looked as though the whole world credit system was going to seize up. That was important. But the fall in stock markets is to be predicted and expected and will happen. And some people will lose a lot of money. But on the whole, the people who will lose money will be able to afford it.
So do you think there is an issue of people, as Briar suggested, feeling an irrational sense of gloom when, in fact, they may have jobs that they're not in danger of losing, they have their health, they have savings. Is there a danger of them being spooked into not spending?
Well, I think there are two dangers. There are dangers for them as individuals, for the reasons that Jock and Briar have both discussed. And I think it's very easy to get frightened by this constant barrage of bad news coming at us on a day-by-day basis. But if too many people do that, then that's bad news for all of us. Because if you stop buying, spending, doing anything at all, then that's the most certain recipe you can have for recession. I think, incidentally, for the moment at any rate, it looks as though we've averted a depression. And that's largely because we know how to deal with that to some degree now.
And yet, the front page of the New Zealand Herald this week, home affordability, which is, as a politician, you'd know is one of those things that people always expect you to fix, and there's no real easy way of doing it. And yet this is good news, isn't it?
That is good news. And again, as Brian said, the price of petrol's coming down. Your mortgages are certainly going down. The price of a lot of capital goods will come down. Some imports might go up as the dollar falls, but there should be more jobs and more return on exports. The midterm prospects for us are not too bad. We happen to be producing the range of goods that are pretty much in demand. Through no fault of our own or virtue of our own, we happen suddenly to have found huge markets not too far away for the sort of things that we're producing. So we shouldn't get into too bad a despond.
Yeah, and maybe we could go to Jock now, because you before this show, went through a few pages of the New Zealand Herald with a highlighter pen. Could you show us those? Could you hold it up to the camera? Because there's a lot of pink on that page.
I was asked to go through highlighting anxiety and kind of worst-case scenario, 1 in 5 out of work, and panic increases in uncertain times.
The picture is
the picture is probably very frightening, and it kind of grabbed me. But it was interesting, as you said before, Brian, you said that don't get too hooked in on things, but I actually think the media does hook us in, and there is a role that making a story interesting and engaging our emotion and keeping us kind of observing. I mean, when there is uncertainty and when there's change, people want more information, because with more information they can predict and be more in control of what's happening. So people naturally get hooked out on gaining more information.
There's also the point, of course, that anything that can be measured and that a number can be put on is more intelligible. So it makes sense to try and follow what's happening to the Dow Jones.
Is the anxiety we're seeing now similar to what people might have been feeling 3 months ago with respect to, say, the crime rate? Do you think it's the same thing?
Well, yes, but in some respects it's almost like it's going to feed into it, because we hear anecdotally about the elderly, for example, pulling their savings out of banks and tucking them under the mattresses, or buying little home safes so that they can make sure that the money that they've saved their whole life is going to not disappear on them. Now, that's going to feed into the crime rate. And those are the types of things that people are getting really worried about, things that they shouldn't be being worried about.
Well, we do have to take a break now, but when we come back, we'll look at a kind of interesting reaction from some people whose response to the credit crunch is to break into song.